The first week of November in 1886 was warm enough to work in shirt sleeves. Men in Ionia County remarked on it. They remarked on it the way you remark on money you did not expect. The grass had come back thin after a dry August. But it had come back. The sloughs still held water. A person could stand out at noon in a cotton shirt and feel the sun on his arms like it was the middle of September. Cattle were fat. Beef was moving. The railhead at Ashcroft was taking everything the county could push at it. It was, by every measure a man could take that autumn, a good year. Docia Kinnard spent that week putting up fence. She was 33 years old. She was broad through the back and the shoulders, with forearms burned dark to the elbow and fair hair going gray early at the temples. She wore a faded blue wool coat that had been her father's. She wore men's boots. She had worn both for 6 seasons. She was building a stackyard fence on the south quarter of her leased ground, 4 miles out of town. She was building it alone, because her hired man was hauling. The fence was 7 feet high. It was pole and wire. It enclosed nothing but hay. That was the part people could not get past. A stackyard is a fence-around feed. It keeps stock out. Cattle will eat into the base of a haystack until the whole thing comes down on them, and then they will stand in it and foul it and waste 4 tons to get it 1. So a person who is serious about hay builds a fence and keeps the animals outside it. There is nothing complicated in the idea. Every outfit in the county had a stackyard somewhere. Docia Kinnard had 11. 11 stackyards on leased ground scattered across 40 miles of Ionia County, holding somewhere between 900 and 1,100 tons of wild hay, depending on the year and the cutting. She did not own cattle. She had never owned cattle. She put up hay, and she held it. Men paid her a fee every year to go on holding it, and in 4 years not one of them had ever needed a pound of it. That was the business. That was the whole business. She called it a reserve. The contract called it a reserve. It ran 2 pages. Ordelia Faw at the store had a copy of every one of them in the safe. And the language was plain enough that a man who could read a bill of sale could read it in 4 minutes. The rancher paid her a standing fee per ton, per year. In exchange, she put up the hay, fenced it, watched it, and kept it available to him at $6 a ton if he ever called for it. If he never called for it, he owed nothing further. The fee bought the availability. It did not buy the hay. That distinction is the whole story. It took 4 years to become the thing that nearly ruined her. She had signed 11 contracts in the spring of 1883. By November of 1886, she had 3. The men who dropped out were not angry, most of them. They were embarrassed, which is worse. A man does not like to go on paying for a thing he has never used. He starts to feel foolish. Then, he starts to look for the reason he was made to feel foolish, and the reason he lands on is almost never the weather. Ambrose Shattuck was 51 that autumn, and he ran better than 4,000 head on the North Range. He had been the second man to sign. He was the first to quit. He quit loudly in the feed store on a Saturday in October of 1885. With 9 men standing around the stove and Ordelia Faw behind the counter with her pen down. 3 winters, Shattuck said. 3 winters I have paid that woman for grass my cattle never put a tooth in. Nobody argued with him. It was true. And I will tell you the part that sticks in me. He was not shouting. He had a big, easy voice, and he never had to shout. She sells it. Every fall. She sells off the hay we pay her to keep. That was true, too. It was so true that Docia, standing 8 feet away at the dry goods end with a spool of wire in her hand, could not say a single word against it. She had sold 410 tons that September. She had sold 360 the September before that. She sold hay every autumn, in the open, off her own stackyards to whoever would buy it. And she wrote every ton of it in a book that anybody was welcome to look at. The men at the stove watched her not answer. She put the wire on the counter. Cordelia wrote it down. Dosia paid, and picked it up, and went out. The door shut behind her. That was the whole of her defense. It would be pleasant to say she went home and wept, or that she stood in the road and framed the perfect reply. She did neither. She drove 4 miles and unloaded wire and set 11 posts before dark. Because the ground was going to freeze in 3 weeks, and a post hole is easier in October than in November. Then she ate and slept and got up, but she did not explain herself in that store or any other store for 1 year and 5 months. The reason she did not is the reason this is a story at all. Here is what she could not say. Hay does not keep. That is the fact underneath everything. Wild hay, cut in July off a Dakota slough and stacked in the open, is worth something the first winter and less the second. By the third it is bedding. The bleach goes down through the top of a stack a foot or more. Water gets into the crown and works down. The bottom 2 feet sit on the ground and draw damp, and go to mold and gray rot, and a cow will eat around it and leave it. The feed value goes out of it, slowly, quietly, and completely. So a reserve that is never touched is not a reserve. It is a slow pile of trash with a fence around it. To hold 1,000 tons of good hay, you cannot simply stack 1,000 tons and sit on it. You have to turn it over. You put up new every summer. You sell off the oldest every autumn. What you are holding is never the same hay, only the same tonnage. The stack in its 3rd year comes down and goes to somebody's cattle for whatever it will fetch. And that money buys the mowing of next year's, and the fence stays up, and the number in the book stays where it is. That is what she was doing every September in front of the whole county. She was maintaining the reserve. It looked exactly, in every visible particular, like selling it. And she could not explain it without saying the sentence. The sentence was this: the hay you paid me to keep is not in that stackyard. It has not been in that stackyard for 3 years. What is in there is hay I cut and put up this summer. And it is better than what you paid for. And I owe you a ton for a ton, and not a stalk of any particular grass. Every word of that is true. Every word of it is also, to a man who has paid a fee for 4 years and never seen a forkful of it, indistinguishable from a confession. She tried it once. It was February of 1885, before Shattuck quit, at the stove in the same store, with 4 men and Cordelia. She got about a minute and a half into it. She got as far as the words does not keep. Then Wesley Trice, who was not laughing and who had no stake in it at all, put a hand up about an inch off his knee and said quietly, "Dosia." She stopped. "They are not hearing the hay," he said. "They are hearing that it is gone." She sat there a while. Then she said, "It is gone. I know it is. That is the correct answer. That is what the contract is for." "I know," Trice said. "I am telling you what they heard." She never tried again. 4 men. 4 men and a stove. She had lost the argument in 90 seconds, and she was right the entire time, and being right had made it worse. Because the more precisely she explained the rotation, the more it sounded like a system. And a system is what a man calls a swindle, when he has already decided he is being swindled. So she stopped explaining and went on stacking. That is not patience. People say patience, later, when they tell it. It was not patience. It was arithmetic. She had run the numbers on speaking and the numbers on silence, and silence came out ahead. And she was a person who went with the numbers even when they were ugly. This one was ugly for 1 year and 5 months. There is a thing that has to be said here about what she was selling. Because it is not insurance, and it is not luck. She was selling a winter that does not kill. That is the product. Not hay. The hay is only the mechanism. What a man bought from Dosia Kinnard was the difference between a February that costs him nothing and a February that ends him. And the trouble with that product, the permanent and unfixable trouble with it, is that when it works, nothing happens. Nothing at all. The cattle come through. The grass comes up. The spring count is the fall count, minus the ordinary losses. And no man alive looks at an ordinary spring and thinks about what did not occur. She could not point at it. There was nothing to point at. Every year of proof looked precisely, to the naked eye, like a year she had been wrong. And Ionia County had 4 of them in a row. That was her whole misfortune, in the end. Not the drought, not the mockery. 4 easy winters, one after another, in 1883 and 1884 and 1885 and 1886, mild and open and short, with the snow going off in March and the loss in the county running under 4%. And the men who had paid her feeling stupider with every mild morning. She was right for 4 years, and it cost her 8 of 11 contracts. The 3 that stayed were Wesley Trice, who ran 900 head south of the river and said almost nothing to anybody, and Alden Prue, who was 71 and did not change his mind about a thing once it was made up, and one other. The one other is the turn in the middle of this. And it comes later. By that warm first week of November in 1886, Dosia Kinnard was 33 years old and unmarried, working ground she did not own, $4,200 in debt to the Ionia Bank against a mowing machine, 2 rakes, a stacker, 8 horses and the leases. And she was standing in shirt sleeves in November, in a warm wind out of the south, building fence around hay that almost nobody was paying her to hold. She had 11 stackyards. She had, by her book, 1,040 tons. It was the most she had ever held. And every man who drove past her that week on the Ashcroft Road looked at that fence going up in the warm sun and understood exactly what he was seeing. And was wrong. To understand why she built that business, you have to go back 16 years, to a different territory and a different winter, and to a girl of 17 who was nobody at all. She was a hired girl. That is the whole of her standing in the world in the autumn of 1870. She cooked and hauled water and washed for 11 men on an outfit on the Jim River. And she was paid $9 a month and her keep, and the man who ran the place was named Ostrander. He was not a fool. That is important. Nearly everyone who tells this story later makes him a fool, because it is easier. But he was not one. He was a careful man with good handwriting and a reputation for paying what he owed. And he had come out of Ohio with money and put every dollar of it on the ground in front of him, and he had done the same arithmetic every other man in that country was doing that year. The arithmetic said the winters were open. It was not superstition. It was evidence. 6 winters running, on that river, the snow had come light and gone off early, and the stock had wintered on the range with almost nothing put up. Men who had hayed heavily in 1865 had watched it rot. Men who had hayed nothing had come through fat. So Ostrander put up 140 tons for 1,100 head. And he wrote in his book that it was a sufficiency. And by the standard of the previous 6 years it was. The snow started on the 11th of December. Dosia was 17. She remembered the date her whole life. And she did not remember it because of the snow. She remembered it because it was the day the cook stove chimney cracked and she spent 4 hours on the roof in it. The snow did not stop in any way that mattered until the middle of February. She did not talk about that winter much. When she did, later, in the 2 or 3 places where it is recorded, she did not talk about the cold, or the wind, or the men. And she never once made herself the point of it. She talked about sound. She said the sound went in 3 stages. The first stage was noise. Cattle bawling on the flat below the house, all night, every night, which is what cattle do when they are hungry and standing still. The second stage was less noise, and the men took that for a good sign for about 4 days. The third stage was quiet. "You want them loud," she said once, to a woman who asked. "Loud is the good one. I did not know that at 17. I know it now." They fed the 140 tons out by the 20th of January. Then they fed the seed oats. Then they pulled the thatch off the stable roof and fed that. Then they cut cottonwood and let the stock browse the bark and the small limbs, which keeps an animal alive for about 9 days and no longer. And by then the drifts were such that they could not get the teams out to cut more. In March it went warm for a week, and everything on the flat turned to water, and then froze again. And that was the end of it. The bank wanted a number. That is the part she carried. Not the sound and not the smell. The number. The bank in Yankton held paper on the outfit, and the bank wanted to know what was left, and a number is not an estimate. And nobody rides out and guesses. Somebody has to count. Ostrander could not do it. He was 58 years old, and he had been out in it since December, and something had gone in him. And in April he sat in the house and did not come out. And he was dead inside 2 years, and it was not the cold that did it. The men were gone. They had drawn what was owed and gone in March, most of them, because there was nothing to be paid with and nothing to do. So it was Dosha Kennard, 17, and a man named Bushrod Tyne, who was 60, and stayed on out of some private stubbornness. And the two of them counted carcasses on the Jim River for 39 days. 39 days. She kept the tally herself, in pencil, in a copybook. Because Tyne could not write. 5 to a group, 4 groups and a stroke, 25 to a block. She counted the draws and the coulee bottoms and the willow bends and the north side of every fence line in the outfit, because that is where they end up, piled against wire in the lee, sometimes 11 and 12 deep. The number was 941, out of 1106. She wrote it at the top of a clean page, and under it she wrote the date, which was the 19th of May, 1871, and she took the copybook into Yankton herself on a borrowed horse, because there was nobody else to take it. She was 17 years old, and she handed a banker a number that killed a man's life, and the banker read it and said thank you and put it in a drawer. She kept that copybook. It was in her trunk in Ionia County 16 years later. It is the reason for everything that follows, and she never once showed it to anybody who was laughing at her, though she could have, any day of the week, and it would have shut them up for about a minute and a half. She did not show it, because it was not an argument. It was a thing that had happened to somebody else, and using it would have been a way of saying, "Trust me." And she did not believe that "trust me" was a thing a person should be asked to do with money. That is a hard way to live. It is also, as it turns out, the only reason her business worked at all when it finally had to. She came into Ionia County in the spring of 1882, 30 years old, with $210, a wagon, 4 horses, and the copybook. She hired out the first summer. She stacked hay for other people, which is heavy, filthy, hot work that pays by the ton. And she was good at it and fast at it, and she was one of 2 women doing it in that county. And she paid attention. What she noticed was this. Every outfit in Ionia County was doing exactly what Ostrander did. Not because they were stupid, because the arithmetic said so. The winters of 1878 through 1882 in that country had been mild, and grass was free and hay cost money. And a man who spends $400 on winter feed he does not use has thrown $400 away, and his neighbor who spent nothing is $400 richer and says so. The market rewards the second man every single year until the year it kills him. And the thing that made it worse, the thing she saw that summer and could not stop seeing, was that nobody could afford to be the careful one alone. If you hay heavily and your neighbor does not, you carry a cost he does not carry, every year, forever, and in a business with margins that thin the cost compounds and you go under in the good years. Being right is expensive. Being right by yourself is fatal. So the whole county went light, together, and stayed light, and every mild winter made the next year's decision easier and worse. She thought about that for one entire winter. And what she came up with in the spring of 1883 was not complicated. And it was not original either, though nobody in Ionia County had done it. She had heard of something like it done with grain in Ohio. Nobody has to carry the cost alone. Spread it. One person puts up the hay. Everybody pays a small standing fee. Nobody eats the full cost of feed they do not use, and everybody has feed if the year comes. It is insurance. She never used the word. Because in 1883 in Dakota Territory, the word insurance out of a woman's mouth in a feed store would have ended the conversation, and she knew it. She called it a reserve. She went to 11 men in March and April of 1883, and she put it to all 11 of them the same way, plainly, with the figures written out, and she did not oversell it once. 11 signed, which sounds like a triumph and was not. They signed because it was cheap. The fee was small, deliberately small. Because a small fee is easy to say yes to, and she needed volume more than she needed margin. And they signed because the man who signed first was Ruel Bayard. Ruel Bayard was 54 years old in 1883, and he ran the largest outfit in that part of the territory, better than 12,000 head on paper. And when Ruel Bayard signed a thing, the county assumed there was a reason, and 10 men signed behind him inside 6 weeks. He read the contract twice. He asked 4 questions. 3 of them were about the rotation, which nobody else asked about at all, and she answered them. And he nodded and signed, and did not say another word about it for 3.5 years. Then she went to work. Here is what putting up 1,000 tons of wild hay looks like. Because the story does not work if you skip it. You cut in July, slough hay, off the low wet ground, and you cut it when the seed is in the dough and not later. And the window in that country is about 18 days. You use a mowing machine and a team, and you go from 4 in the morning until the dew is off. And then again in the afternoon. You let it lie. You rake it into windrows. You let it cure, and the curing is the part that decides whether what you have is feed or garbage, because hay put up damp will heat in the stack, and hay that heats will mold, and a stack that heats badly enough will take fire on its own in November with nobody within a mile of it. Then you bunch it and haul it and stack it. The stack is the craft. Anybody can pile hay. A pile sheds water for 1 season. A stack that is going to stand 3 winters in the open, with no roof and no shed, is built with a crown and a slope and a settle allowance, and the sides are trimmed, and the top is capped, and if you build it right the outer 4 inches take the weather, and everything under that stays green. Green, that is the word for it. You open a well-built stack in the 3rd February, and the middle is still green, and it smells like July. Nobody sees that. That is the trouble. Nobody ever sees the inside of a good stack except the person who built it and the animals that eat it. She put up her first 430 tons that summer with 2 hired men, 1 mowing machine, a sulky rake, a stacker she built herself out of poles, and 11 weeks. She was 30 years old, and she weighed, by her own account, near 180 pounds, and she said later that she came out of that first haying at 154. Then she built the fences. Then it snowed 9 inches in December, and went off warm at Christmas, and stayed open until March. Nobody called for a pound. The numbers are worth going through, because the whole quarrel was about numbers, and almost nobody in it ever did the arithmetic. The fee was 40 cents a ton a year. That is the figure. It is in 9 surviving contracts, and it did not change between 1883 and 1901. A man with a 200-ton reserve paid $80 a year. Not $80 a ton. $80 total for the year to have 200 tons of sound feed standing behind him inside a day's haul. $80 in Ionia County in 1885 was about what a man paid a hired hand for 2 months. If he called for the hay, he paid $6 a ton on top, which was the market price in an ordinary autumn, and about a fifth of the market price in a bad February. That is the entire product. 40 cents a ton to hold, $6 a ton to take. Now do it from her side. Cutting, curing, hauling, and stacking a ton of wild hay cost her between $2.10 and $2.90, depending on the ground and the year and how far she had to haul it. Call it 2.5. So a ton in a stack yard represented $2.50 of her money. And it earned her 40 cents a year from the man it was held for, and it had to be sold and replaced every 3rd year. Sell it in the 3rd year for $3, which is about what old hay fetched. She is out $2.50 and in 3. So the rotation itself makes her about 50 cents a ton every 3 years. Add the fee. 40 cents a year. 3 years. $1.20. $1.70 over 3 years on a $2.50 investment. That is not a bad business. It is not a good one either. It is a business with a thin, honest margin that only works at volume. And it requires the operator to have enough capital to have $2.50 sitting in a field for 3 years for every ton she holds. 1,100 tons is $2,750 of hay lying in fenced fields earning 40 cents a ton, which is why she was $4,000 in debt. That is the thing Judson Alcorn could not lend against, and he was right that he could not. Her entire balance sheet was grass in a field with somebody else's name against it, and a fence around it. There is one more number, and it is the one that decided everything. 8 contracts, at an average of 140 tons, at 40 cents. $448 a year. That is what the mockery cost her. Not a fortune. $448 a year, which against a business of that size was the difference between paying her note and not paying it. The whole 4-year crisis of Dosha Kinnard's life, the name, the meeting, the 11 months from foreclosure, comes down to $448 a year in fees from men who could each have carried their share for the price of a decent saddle. Nobody was ruined by paying her. That is what makes it hard to look at. Not one of the 8 men who quit was under any real pressure from that fee. 2 of them said times were close and times were close, but neither of them was quitting $80 to save $80. They quit because it felt foolish. That is the whole mechanism, and it is not about money at all. A man will carry a small cost forever if he believes in it. The moment he stops believing, the same small cost becomes intolerable, not because of the money, but because every payment is a small admission that he was gulled. And what made them stop believing was 4 mild winters and a sentence in a feed store. Now the other side of the ledger, in February of 1887. Hay at the Ashcroft railhead reached $38 a ton and there was none. A man who had held a 200-ton contract for 4 years had paid $320 in fees over that time and could take his 200 tons at $6 a ton, which is $1,200. $1,520 all in for 200 tons. The same 200 tons at the February price, if it had existed at all, was $7,600. He saved $6,080 on a 4-year outlay of $320. And that is before you count the cattle. Ambrose Shattuck had quit a contract for 180 tons in October of 1885. He had saved himself, over the 16 months between quitting and the January of 1887, $96. He lost 2,700 head. Nobody ever put those two figures side by side in front of him, and she certainly never did. And the only reason they are known at all is that Judson Alcorn worked them out at the bank in 1889 in the same idle hour he worked out hers, and wrote both on the same sheet of paper, and kept it. That sheet is in the county rooms. It is not a document about hay. It is a document about what 4 mild years do to the judgment of careful men. And Alcorn's own note at the bottom of it says as much. His note says, neither party in error as to the facts. All figures known to all at the time. The second summer she put up 520 tons. The second winter was mild. The third summer she put up 600. The third winter was mild. The fourth summer she put up 710, and the fourth winter was the mildest of the 4. And by the end of it, she had lost 6 of her 11 contracts. It went in a particular order. That order matters. The first 2 to quit were the 2 smallest. Neither of them made anything of it. They came to her, separately, and were decent about it, and said times were close. And they were, and she released them both, and did not charge the balance of the year. She could have charged it. The contract allowed it. She did not. And Ordelia Faw noted in the store book that she did not. And that note is one of about 4 pieces of hard paper that survived from any of this. The third was Ambrose Shattuck, in the feed store, in October of 1885. And that one was not quiet. After Shattuck, it went quickly. That is how it works. One man says a thing out loud in a room with 9 men in it, and the thing is now sayable. And by spring 3 more had gone, and by the autumn of 1886 there were 3 left. Here is what the county saw in those 4 years. They saw a woman with no cattle putting up more hay every summer than the year before. They saw her fence it. They saw her sit on it all winter while nobody touched it. And they saw her sell hay off those same stackyards every single September, in daylight, on the road, in wagon loads, to buyers from 2 counties over. That is the entire visible record. Every item in it is accurate. Now put yourself at that stove. You have paid this woman a fee for 4 years. You have never seen a forkful of what you paid for. You have watched her haul it away and sell it to somebody else every autumn, 4 autumns running. What is the honest conclusion? The honest conclusion is that you are being taken. That is the thing about this story, that the county was not wrong about anything they could see. They were not cruel, and they were not stupid, and most of them were not even unfair. They were working from the visible record. And the visible record said exactly one thing, and the one thing it said was false. It takes a specific kind of bad luck to build a business where doing the job correctly and robbing your customers look identical from the road. She had built one. The autumn sales were the worst of it. They took 9 days, usually, middle of September. She would bring down the oldest stacks, the third-year ones, and load them out, and the wagons would go through town because the road went through town. There was no way to hide it, and she never tried. Emmett Dressel drove for her those 4 autumns. He was 26, quiet, with a bad left hand from a mowing machine, and he had worked for her since the second summer. He hated the September hauls. They stand out, he told her, the second year. On the walk, they come out to watch it go by. I know. Ordelia's husband counted the loads, out loud. He was counting them out loud, Dosia. How many did he get? Emmett stopped. 41. He was too light, she said. Tell him 43. That is the only recorded instance of Dosha Kinnard making a joke about any of it, and Emmett Dressel told it at her funeral 31 years later, and by then, everyone in the room knew why it was funny. At the time, he did not laugh. You could tell them, he said. I did tell them. Once was enough to learn what it does. She was checking a load chain. She did not look up. If I explain it in September, Emmett, while the wagons are going by, do you know what they hear? No. They hear a person with a reason. She pulled the chain tight. A man who has a reason ready for the thing you just watched him do is worse than a man with none. You know that. You have met people. He thought about it a while, and then he said, Yes, so I will not have a reason ready. I will have a book. The book is the other piece of hard paper. She kept a hay book, and it was not a private thing. It was on a shelf in the front room of the house she rented in town. And it was open on the shelf, not in a drawer, and any man who was owed a ton by Dosha Kinnard could walk in and read it. And about 4 ever did. Every ton in and every ton out. Where it was cut. What year. Which stackyard, what it went for, who bought it. The rotation was right there. It had always been right there. Anybody who read 2 facing pages could see it in 90 seconds, and Rule Bayard had read it. And Wesley Trice had read it, and Alden Prue had had his nephew read it to him because his eyes were going. Those 3 stayed. Every man who quit without opening the book. That is not a coincidence, and it is not quite a moral either. People do not read the book. People read the road. The road is free and immediate, and it is happening in front of you, and the book is on a shelf in a house you would have to walk into and admit you had doubts about. And there is a particular kind of shame in being seen going in to check. So they did not check. They watched the wagons. The nickname started in the winter of 1885. She was the Hay Widow. It was not accurate. She had never been married, and everybody in the county knew it, which was rather the point of it. It meant a woman who profits from a death that has not happened. It was a good sharp name, and it got around the county in about 6 weeks, and men said it to her face twice and behind her back for 2 years. She never once objected to it. When a man used it at the store in December of 1885, she turned around and said, That is right, and paid for her salt and left, and the man was still sitting there 15 minutes later. And it had gone badly wrong on him somehow, and he could not work out how. The money went bad in 1886. That is the practical fact that sits underneath the whole spring and summer of that year. 8 contracts gone. Her income from fees was down by better than 2/3 from the 1883 figure. And she still had 11 stackyards to maintain, and 8 horses to feed, and a note at the bank. Judson Alcorn at the Ionia Bank was not an enemy. He was a bank. There is a difference, and the difference did not help her. He called her in on the 14th of April, 1886. You are carrying 4,200, he said. 4,180. Against equipment and leases. Yes, your fee income last year was 900 and change. You cannot service it. Not on fees alone. I sold hay. You will always sell hay, Alcorn said. That is my difficulty, Miss Kinnard. I cannot tell your business from a hay business. You put up hay and you sell hay. That is a hay business. It is a good one. But if it is a hay business, then the fences are an expense that makes no sense to me, and the 11 leases make no sense to me. And I have been looking at this paper for 2 weeks, and I cannot make it be anything but a hay business, with a strange habit. She was quiet for a moment. It is not a strange habit, she said. It is the entire product. Explain it to me. And here is the thing. She did explain it to him. Fully, and for 20 minutes, with the book which she had brought. Alcorn understood it. He was not a stockman, and he had no pride in the question, and he had spent his life reading paper, and he followed the rotation on the second try and said, "Ah," in the middle of it, out loud, the way a man does when a thing comes clear. Then he said the sentence that mattered. "I follow it," he said. "I do not know how to lend against it." Why not? Because it pays only in a year that has not come. If it never comes, the asset is a fence and some grass. He set his pen down. And if it does come, Miss Kinnard, half the county will be selling cattle at whatever they can get, and my paper will be bad on 40 other notes, and I will not care what your hay is worth. That was in April. She left the bank with an extension of 11 months and a line about what she could not spend. And she got in the wagon. And she went out to the North Quarter, and she started the mowing on the 2nd of July, as though nothing had been said to her at all. The summer of 1886 was dry. Not a failure. Dry, the June rains came short, and the July rains did not come. And the slough hay ran light and thin, and she got less to the acre than any year she had worked that ground. She hayed harder. She cut ground she had never cut, 10 miles further out, and paid for 2 more leases she could not afford, and put on a third man for 6 weeks. And she put up 940 tons. More than any year. In the worst year. Into 11 fenced stackyards with 3 contracts on her book and no earthly reason to. Emmett Dressel asked her about it in August. It is the only question he ever asked her twice. Who is it for? She was standing on a stack. She had a fork in her hand, and she was trimming a side. And the light was going, and he was down on the wagon looking up at her. "Put the rest up," she said. "Docia, who is it for?" She went on trimming for a moment. "The grass is gone," she said. He looked around at the flat, which had grass on it, thin and short and gray-green and going to nothing, the way it does in a dry August. "There is grass. There is this year's grass," she said. "Cropped to the crown, in April, by more cattle than this county has ever carried. Look at the coulee sides. Look at what is coming back in the swales." He looked. "There is no reserve in the ground, Emmett, not a bit. Not anywhere in 40 miles. She put the fork down and stood up straight. Every mild winter, men bought more cattle. 4 in a row. There are more head on this range than the grass carried in a wet year, and it is not a wet year, and it has not been for 14 months. She picked the fork back up. "There is nothing under them," she said. "That is all. There is nothing under them at all." Then she said, "Put the rest up," and he did. 8 men quit. They are worth taking one at a time, because 8 men quitting sounds like a movement, and it was not. It was 8 separate small decisions made by 8 men who mostly did not consult each other, and every one of them had a reason. And every reason was reasonable. Here are 4 of them. Harmon Speece quit in April of 1885. He was the first. He ran 110 head on the east side, and he was 63, and his wife had been sick since Christmas. He came out to the place himself rather than send word, which not all of them did. He said times were close. Times were close. He had a doctor's bill out of Ashcroft and a bad calf crop. And the $44 was a real $44 to him, in a way it was not to Ambrose Shattuck. She released him and did not charge the balance. "You will take it up again," she said. "I might." He did not. He was still in the county in 1887, and he lost 71 head out of 94, and he did not come back to her afterward either. And when he died in 1896, he had 11 head, and was living with a nephew. There is no lesson in Harmon Speece. He was a man with a sick wife and $44. Otho Vandermark quit in June of 1885. He was 38, and he had money, and he was not close at all. He quit by letter, and the letter survives, and it is 4 lines, and it is polite, and it says nothing. What he told other men, and it got back to her within a fortnight, was that he had run the figures and could put up his own hay for less than her fee. That was true. It was exactly true. Any man could put up his own hay for less than 40 cents a ton a year. Putting up hay is not expensive. It is the standing ready that is expensive, the fence and the rotation, and the 3 years of capital lying in a field. And Vandermark had no intention of doing any of that, and never did. He put up 60 tons in the summer of 1885 and fed it out in an ordinary February, and never put up another ton. That is the commonest way of quitting a thing. You do not decide to stop. You decide to do it yourself. And then you do it once, and then you do not. He lost 81% in 1887. Ambrose Shattuck quit in October of 1885 in the feed store, and there is nothing to add about that except one thing, which is that he had not come in that day to quit. Cordelia Faw was certain of it. She said so more than once. He came in for wire staples and a barrel of salt. What happened is that 2 men at the stove were already on the subject when he came through the door, in a mild way, the way men are. And he heard about 90 seconds of it, and something in him went over. He had been the second man to sign, and he had signed because Ruel Bayard signed, and he had paid 3 years. And he had spent 3 winters being aware that he was paying, and it had been sitting there the whole time waiting for 90 seconds at a stove. 9 men heard him. 8 of them agreed with him. Wesley Trice was the 9th, and he did not say anything, and Dosha Kennard was at the dry goods end with a spool of wire. Cleophas Ruddy quit in March of 1886, and he is the one that mattered most, because of who he was. Ruddy was 51, and he was not a big operator, 400 head. But he was the man that other middling men in that county watched. He was careful and slow, and he had never been caught out in anything. And he had a reputation for reading a thing properly before he signed it. He read the contract properly. He was one of the 4 who ever opened the haybook. He came out in March, alone, and he sat in her front room for an hour and 40 minutes with the book open in front of him, and he went through the rotation page by page. And at the end of it he said, "I understand it." "Do you?" "I do. It is sound." He closed the book. "And I am going to quit anyway, and I would rather tell you why to your face than have you hear it." "All right. It is sound, if you are honest," Ruddy said. "The whole of it rests on that. There is no way for me to check a single figure in this book against anything in the world. The tons in it are the tons you have written in it. You could ride the yards. And count stacks. And guess the tonnage in them within a fifth if I am lucky." He put his hands on his knees. "Miss Kinnard, I have no reason on this earth to think you dishonest. That is not what I am saying. I am saying that I have found the place where this thing rests on trusting you, and I am 51, and I have got a rule about that, and the rule has been right more often than it has been wrong." She was quiet a moment. "The rule is a good rule," she said. "I know it is. It is going to cost you a great deal of money." "It might," Ruddy said. "It has saved me a great deal twice." They shook hands. He rode home. He quit in writing the following week, and he never said one word against her to anybody, ever. And when Bayard stood up in the upstairs room in July of 1887, Cleophas Ruddy was the first man on his feet afterward. He had lost 64% by then. He signed a new contract in August of 1887 for 400 tons, which was more than he had ever held. And he held it until he died. He said one thing about it, in 1891, to a man who asked him whether he felt foolish about the years he had quit. "No," he said. "I was not foolish. I was careful, and careful was wrong that time. That is a thing that happens, and there is no way round it. If I had been foolish, I could fix it. The Ionia County Stock Association met on the 6th of October 1886 in the upstairs room over the land office. 31 men were there. Docia Kinnard was there because she paid the $2 membership and had paid it every year. And nobody had ever worked out a way to tell her not to. She sat at the back on the left, on the second chair from the wall. The business of the meeting was ordinary. A bounty question, a complaint about the Ashcroft scales, a motion about strays that carried without discussion. Then Ambrose Shattuck stood up. He had papers. That was the first thing anybody noticed. Shattuck was not a paper man, and he had 4 sheets in his hand. And the room went quiet, in the particular way a room goes quiet when it understands that the real business has started. "I want to say a thing, and I want it in the minutes," he said. The secretary picked up his pen. What Shattuck read out was a tally. He had gone to the trouble. He had been to Ashcroft and to Verdun, and he had talked to 2 hay buyers and a freight agent. And he had built, over about 5 weeks, a list of every load of hay Docia Kinnard had sold off her stackyards since the spring of 1883. He read it by year. 1884, 190 tons. 1885, 360. 1886, September, 410. 960 tons, Shattuck said, sold off stackyards that 11 men in this room paid her to keep full. He put the papers down on the table. "I am not accusing anybody of anything unlawful," he said, and he meant it, which was the worst part. "I have read that contract. My son read it. There is nothing in it she has broken. I am telling you what she has done, and I am telling you that I paid 3 years for it, and I would like the men still paying to hear the figure out loud." Then he sat down. There is a thing that happens in a room at a moment like that, and it is not shouting. Nobody shouted. 30 men turned their heads about 15 degrees, all of them at once, toward the second chair from the wall on the left. The chairman was a man named Fenner Cobb, and he did not want any part of it. "Miss Kinnard," he said, "do you care to answer?" She stood up. She was standing, taller than a good many of the men in that room, and wider through the shoulders than half of them, and she had come from the stackyard and had not changed, and there was chaff in the wool of her coat. "Mr. Shattuck," she said, "where did you get the 1884 figure?" "Corwin, at the Ashcroft yard." "It is low." She did not raise her voice at all. "It was 206. Corwin does not have the 4 loads that went to the Pilger outfit in November because they were hauled by their own teams and never went through his scale." The room did not move. "The 1885 figure is right," she said. 360 is right. This September was 410, and you have it right as well." Shattuck was looking at her with the beginnings of something on his face that was not triumph. "So the figure is not 960, she said. "It is 976. If you are going to put it in the minutes, put the correct one in." Fenner Cobb said, "Miss Kinnard." "That is my answer," she said. "That is not an answer." "It is the only one I have that is true," she said. "He has asked whether I sold 976 tons off those stackyards. I did. I am not going to stand in this room and tell you that a true thing is false." She sat down. The secretary wrote it in the minutes. That book still exists. It is in the county historical rooms at Ionia, and the entry runs 11 lines. And the last line of it is, "Miss Kinnard corrected the figure upward and offered no further statement." She had 30 men in a room. She had the floor. She had, in a house 4 miles away on an open shelf, a book that would have taken 9 minutes to explain and would have answered every word of it. And what she did was correct his arithmetic against herself and sit down. The obvious question is why? People have made it into a kind of nobility since. And it was not that. It was not stubbornness either, though it looked like stubbornness from every seat in the room. It was the same calculation she had run in February of 1885 with 4 men at a stove, and she had simply run it again with 31. To explain the rotation she had to say that the hay in the stackyards was not their hay. She had to say the words, "What you paid for is gone, and what is in there now is mine, and I owe you a tonnage and not a stack." Say that in a room where a man has just read out 976 tons, and it is not an explanation. It is the confession he was hoping for, delivered in her own voice, in front of the secretary, into the minutes. There was no version of the true statement that did not sound worse than silence. That is device 18. And it is worth naming plainly, because it is a nastier trap than it looks. Her whole product was an event that must not happen. She could not exhibit it. There was nothing to exhibit. A winter that does not kill leaves no evidence behind it, only an ordinary spring. And the work of keeping that product ready, the rotation, the selling off of old hay every autumn, was in its outward appearance identical to stealing it. So she could be believed, or she could maintain the reserve. She could not do both. Every September she chose the reserve. 4 times. She walked home from that meeting. It was 1.5 miles, and it was full dark by the time she got there. And Emmett Dressel had heard about it before she reached the house, because a thing like that goes through a county faster than a person can walk. He was on the step. Is it true what he read? Yes, she said. He was 16 tons light. I fixed it. Emmett put his hands over his face. Dosia, go home, Emmett. He did not go home. He sat on the step for a while, and then he said, I would have said it, if you had let me. I have read the book. I could have stood up and said it in about a minute. I know you could. Then why? She sat down next to him, which she had never done, and she was tired in a way she did not usually let anybody see. Because they would have believed you, she said. He turned and looked at her. You are a man who works for me, she said. You would have stood up and explained it, and half that room would have thought, well, there it is. That is sensible after all. And the other half would have thought she has got her hired man to say it, because she will not. Half is better than none. Not for this. She was looking out at the road. Emmett, if a stranger comes through here in 1890 and asks who put up the hay in the bad year, I want the answer to be a hay book with the tons in it. Not a story about a woman who was good at talking. If I win it by talking, then it is a thing I won by talking, and the next woman who tries this has to be good at talking too. He did not have anything to say to that. The hay is either right or it is not right, she said, in 4 years or in 10. It will be one or the other, and no amount of me being clever in a room will change which. Then she said, go home. And this time he did. 9 days after that meeting, on the 15th of October, Alden Prue died. He was 72. It was his heart, and it was quick, and he was in his own kitchen. His nephew inherited and canceled the contract on the 2nd of November, politely, by letter. And the letter is preserved and is entirely courteous, and says that the estate was simplifying its obligations, which was true. That left 2. Wesley Trice. And the one other. Reuel Bayard came to see her on the 19th of June, 1886. He came alone, in the evening, on horseback, which was not how Reuel Bayard traveled. He kept a buggy and a driver. He was 57 and he had a bad hip, and he did not ride 4 miles in the evening for pleasure. He tied up at the gate of the home stackyard and waited there until she came down off the stack. Miss Kinnard. Mr. Bayard, I want to change my contract. She wiped her hands on her skirt and said, "All right," and she said it in the voice of a person who has heard that sentence 8 times in 4 years and knows how it ends. "Upward," Bayard said. She stopped wiping her hands. "I want to go from 200 tons to 600, he said, "at the same rate per ton. For 3 years, paid annually in advance, and I will pay the first year now." There is no record of what she said. Emmett Dressel was 40 feet away pitching, and he heard the whole thing, and when he told it later, he said she did not say anything for what felt to him like a long time. Then she said, "Why?" "Because the grass is gone," Bayard said, which is the same sentence she said to Emmett Dressel 2 months later, in August, on top of a stack. She had not got it from Bayard. He had not got it from her. 2 people in Ionia County had ridden the same country that spring, and read the same ground, and arrived at the same 4 words, and neither of them knew the other had. "How far out have you looked?" she asked him. "To the Cheyenne, and north to the line." "And?" "It is cropped to the crown from here to both," Bayard said. "There is no carry over anywhere I have been, and there are more cattle on it than there have ever been, and I put a great many of them there myself, and I am not going to pretend otherwise." He shifted on the horse because of the hip. "There is one more thing, and I will say it once," he said. "I have a contract with you already, and I have had it 4 years. In that time I have watched 8 men leave it. 2 of them asked my opinion first, and I told them nothing, and I have thought about that a good deal." "Why did you tell them nothing?" "Because I did not want to be the man who talked them into it," Bayard said. "And because if I had said keep it, they would have asked why, and I would have had to say what I have just said to you about the grass. And a man in my position cannot say that out loud." She understood him immediately. It is one of the reasons the 2 of them got on for the next 20 years. "Your paper," she said. "My paper." Ruel Bayard had 12,000 head on the books and better than $60,000 of Eastern money behind him, and his creditors were in Chicago and in Scotland, and they read the same newspapers everybody else read. If it became known that Bayard was buying winter feed on a scale nobody in that country had ever bought winter feed, it would not read as prudence, it would read as distress. It would say, in the only language a lender speaks, that the largest operator in Ionia County had looked at his own range and did not think his cattle would live. His credit would have gone inside a month. And a man whose credit goes in a bad autumn sells cattle in a bad spring, which is the exact death he was trying to avoid. "So I will ask you for a thing I have no right to ask," Bayard said. "I want it kept quiet." "For how long?" "Until it is over, however it goes." She thought about it standing in the gate with her hands still dirty. Here is what she was actually being offered, and what it cost. 600 tons at her standing rate, 3 years, first year in advance, was more money than the whole rest of her business had made in 18 months. It cleared Alcorn. It cleared the leases. It paid for the 2 extra sections she was about to cut, and the 3rd man she was about to hire. It was, in the plainest terms, rescue, and it came with the condition that nobody could ever know about it. Which meant this. From June of 1886 forward, the largest and most respected stockman in the county had privately tripled his commitment to her. And the county would go on believing she had 2 customers left and was finished. Worse than that, because now she would be seen putting up 940 tons. In a drought year, with 3 names on her book that anybody knew about. Every man in Ionia County who watched her cut 10 miles out and hire a 3rd hand and stack harder in a dry summer than she had in a wet one was going to arrive at exactly one conclusion. And it would not be that she had a secret customer. It would be that she had lost her judgment. She took it. 3 years, she said. 600 tons. and I will want it in writing, even though nobody is going to see it. Naturally, Mr. Bayard, she put her hand on the gate, if it goes the other way. If it is open and mild and easy, and your cattle winter on grass, and you have paid me for 3 years of nothing. What then? Then I have paid for 3 years of nothing, Bayard said, and I will not say one word about it to anybody, because that was the arrangement, and it will have been a good arrangement. That is what the fee is. He gathered the reins. That is the part they none of them ever understood, he said. It is not a wager, Miss Kinnard. A wager pays when you win. This pays when you lose. Then he rode home. The contract was signed on the 22nd of June, 1886, and witnessed by Cordelia Faw, who put it in the safe and did not mention it to her husband for 9 months, which in a county that size is a feat of character that deserves its own telling. So the whole shape of that summer was this. Dotia Kinnard was solvent for the first time in 2 years and could not tell anybody. She had 4 contracts, not 2. And the 4th was 4 times the size of the other 3 together, and it was in a safe. And she went out and hayed the worst ground of her life, the dry cut light. She got 1 ton and 1/5 to the acre, where she was used to 2.5. She cut ground she had never touched, out toward the breaks. And some of it was so thin she was mowing 4 inches of grass, and it hardly paid the horses. She worked from the 1st of July to the 11th of September. She lost 11 pounds and a horse. She had a wagon go over on the Verdun grade and lose a wheel and 40 minutes of daylight. And she stacked the load by hand into a temporary bunch and came back for it 2 days later. And on the 12th of September, she brought down the 3rd-year stacks and hauled 9 days through town, 410 tons, past the walk, past the store, past the men who came out to watch it go by. That was the September that Shattuck was counting. She knew he was counting. Emmett told her in the 2nd week. Shattuck's been to Ashcroft. He's been at Corwin about the scale tickets. All right. Dotia, he is building something. He is building a list of things I did, she said. Let him. Every one of them is going to be right. She was in the barn. She was doing something to a hamestrap, and she did not stop doing it. There is going to be a winter, she said. Or there is not. Nothing that man writes on a piece of paper changes which. By the end of October, she had 940 tons in 11 fenced stackyards, 100 tons of it new cut in ground so poor she had not bothered to fence it and had stacked it against a natural draw instead. She had 4 contracts, 3 of which were public, and totaled 290 tons. She had, on paper that anybody could see, a business that had shrunk by 3/4 and was going to end. And in the first week of November, the wind came out of the south, and it was warm enough to work in shirt sleeves. And every man who drove past her fence line on the Ashcroft Road that week looked at what she was doing and understood exactly what he was seeing. The snow started on the 16th of November. It would be easy to leave the county looking like fools, and it would not be honest. So here is the best case against her, put as well as it can be put. It is a strong case. It was made by intelligent men. 4 of its 5 points are unanswerable, and she never answered them. 1. She had no cattle. A stockman who tells other stockmen how to winter their stock is standing behind his advice with his own herd. She was not. Whatever happened, she would not lose an animal. Because she did not own one. Every year she was wrong cost her a little. No year she was wrong would ever cost her the way it cost them. She was selling a judgment she was not exposed to. 2. Her income did not depend on the hay being needed. The fee was paid whether or not. That is the design. And the design is sound, but look at it from a chair at a stove. Her interest was in men going on paying. And it was in nothing else. A man who profits equally from your fear and your safety is not obviously your friend. And every one of them knew a lightning rod salesman. 3. Nobody could inspect the product. You can inspect a horse. You can bend a strap and taste leather. You cannot inspect a reserve. Because what is being sold is not the hay in the yard, it is a promise about a February that has not happened. A man of ordinary shrewdness has a rule about things he cannot inspect. And the rule is a good one, and it served most of them well their whole lives. 4. The visible facts were consistent with a swindle and inconsistent with nothing. Every single thing the county could see, she also would have done if she were robbing them. Put up hay, fence it, take fees, sell hay. There was no observable difference between Dosha Kinnard doing her job perfectly and Dosha Kinnard running a 4-year confidence scheme. And a man who noticed that was not being stupid. He was noticing something true. 5. And this is the one that is not fair. And it was the loudest. She was a woman doing it. That one does not deserve a serious answer, and it will not get one here. But it has to be counted, because it is why the first 4 points went off like they did. A man with the same business and the same September wagons would have been called shrewd for about 2 years before anybody thought the word swindle. The county did not invent its suspicion because she was a woman. It reached for it faster. And it held it longer, and it enjoyed it more. Those are the 5. And they were argued at that stove for 4 years, and here is the thing. She agreed with 4 of them. She said so in 1894 to the farm paper man when he asked her whether the county had been unjust. They were not unjust. They were careful, she said. Careful men lost their outfits that Winter and careless ones did too, and the difference between them was mostly luck, and I will not stand here at 41 and tell you that the men who doubted me were fools, because they were doing exactly what a sensible man does, which is not to buy a thing he cannot look at. But you were right. I was right about the weather, she said. That is all I was right about. I was not right about them. I thought if the terms were fair and the book was open, that would be enough. And it was not. And it was never going to be. And I was slow to see it. What would have been enough? She took a while over that one. Nothing available to me, she said. That is what I came to. There was no sentence and no document and no demonstration. I have thought about it for 8 years, and I cannot construct the thing that would have worked. That is the truthful center of it, and it is bleaker than the version people prefer. She could not fix it by talking, because talking sounded like a reason. She could not fix it by the book, because nobody opens the book. She could not fix it by the copybook from the Jim River, because that moves people instead of proving anything, and once you have won by moving people, you will never again know whether you are right. She could not fix it by the contract, because the contract was the thing they had all read and signed, and it had not stopped one of them from quitting. And she could not fix it by waiting, because waiting only works if the event comes, and if the event comes then, hundreds of thousands of animals are dead, and half the men who doubted her are finished. And that is not a solution, it is a catastrophe that happens to include a solution. There was no good road out of that trap, and she was in it for 4 years. What she did, in the end, was not solve it. She endured it, at a cost she could state in dollars. And she went on doing the work correctly while it was being misread, on the bet that correct work leaves a record, and a record eventually gets read by somebody. That is not inspiring. Particularly, it is, however, what actually happened. And there were 22 outfits standing in Ionia County in the spring of 1888 because of it. The snow started on the 16th of November, and it was nothing. 4 inches. It came in the night, and it was pretty in the morning, and it was gone off the south slopes by the second afternoon. Men said what men say. Early means an open one. The second storm came on the 24th, and it did not go off. That is the detail that turned it, not the depth. The snow of the 24th was 7 inches, and 7 inches is not a thing that frightens anybody in Dakota Territory. It did not go off. The temperature dropped on the 26th, and it stayed down. And the 7 inches of the 24th was still on the ground on the 10th of December, with 14 more on top of it, and by then everybody had stopped saying open. Dosha Kennard did not do anything at all in November. That is worth sitting with, because it is the part that surprises people. She had 11 stackyards and 940 tons, and a county that had laughed at her for 2 years, and the weather had just started to turn her way. And she did nothing. She did not ride into town. She did not call on anybody. She did not go to the store and stand near the stove. She fed her own horses, and she mended a stacker frame, and she wrote her November figures in the hay book. On the 2nd of December, she rode the 11 yards, all of them, over 4 days, and checked every fence and every cap, and pulled the snow off 2 crowns that had drifted heavy on one side. Emmett Dressel asked her, in the first week of December, whether she was going to go and see anybody. No, there are men who are going to want hay in about 5 weeks. Then in about 5 weeks they will know where I live. You could go now. Prices are still nothing. You could sign 4 men this week. She looked at him. Emmett, she said, think about what that is. He thought about it. You would be selling to frightened men, he said slowly. I would be riding around a snowed-in county in December, telling stockmen their cattle are going to die unless they pay me. She went back to the strap. That is not a business. That is a different trade entirely, and men who do it are correctly despised, and they are correctly despised even in the years when they turn out to be right. So you wait. I have hay. It is fenced, and it is good, and it is not going anywhere, she said. If it is needed, it will be needed whether I go out and frighten people or not. And if it is not needed, then thank God. And I will have been wrong in a way that costs nobody anything but me. That is the second time the shape of this shows up. And it is the harder half of device 18, and almost nobody notices it. She could not want to be proved right. The other women in these stories can want it. A tanner can want the winter that tests her leather. A roper can want the load that proves her splice. The vindication is a good day when it comes. Dosha Kennard's vindication required the deaths of several 100,000 animals across 4 territories and the ruin of most of the men she knew. There was no version of being proved right that she could hope for. The only outcome she was permitted to want was the one that made her look like a fraud forever. She said it once to Ordelia Faw in that December, and Ordelia wrote it down that evening on the back of a receipt, which is how it survives. I would like to be wrong, she said. I have wanted to be wrong for 4 years. I would take the whole 4 years of it again, and another 4 on top, if it went off warm in January. It did not go off warm in January. The 3rd storm came on the 19th of December, and the 4th on the 28th. And by the 1st of January, there was better than 2 feet on the level in Ionia County, and it had not been above freezing in 36 days. Cattle drift. That is the thing that killed that country, and it is not obvious unless you have seen it. Cattle in a storm do not stand and face it. They turn their tails to the wind, and they walk, slowly, for as long as it blows. In open country with no fence they will drift 40 miles and come to a river or a coulee or a rail cut and pile there. But the country was not open anymore. That was new. The homestead sections had gone in through the early 80s, and there was wire across a good deal of Ionia County that had not been there in 1880. And the drifting stock came down onto those fence lines in the dark and stopped there and could not go on. The snow filled in behind them. They were 4 days finding out how bad it was. Because nobody could travel. The mail did not run for 11 days in January. The first real word came in on the 8th, when 2 of Shattuck's men got through to town on foot, and what they had to say went around Ionia inside an hour. Shattuck had lost the north fence line. All of it. The cattle were on the wire, in the drifts, along a 3-mile stretch, and they had been there since the storm of the 28th, and by the time anybody reached them, there was nothing to be done. That was one fence line on one outfit in the first week of January. The winter had 11 more weeks to run. Here is what it was like, in the plainest terms I can put it. Because this is the middle of the story, and there is no way past it. There was no feed anywhere, not on the ground. Because the ground was under 2 feet of snow and had been cropped bare before the snow came. Not in the sheds. Because nobody in that county had put up more than a token, and what they had put up was gone by the 10th of January in most cases, and the 20th in the careful ones. There was none to buy. The hay at the Ashcroft railhead was gone in 9 days. After that it came in by rail from Iowa and Minnesota, and then it did not come in at all. Because the rail cuts drifted full and stayed full, and there were 3 weeks in that winter when nothing moved on that line in either direction. The price of hay at Ashcroft went from $6 a ton in October to $38 a ton in February, and at $38 a ton there was none for sale. Men fed what they had. Then they fed what they could reach. They pulled thatch, and they cut cottonwood, and they hauled brush, and some of them broke up straw stacks that had been rotting in a field since 1883, and fed that, and straw is not feed, it is something to put in a stomach. And the animals went quiet. Dosha Kinnard knew what quiet meant. She had known since she was 17 years old on the Jim River. She sat in a rented house in Ionia with 11 full stackyards inside 4 miles and a hay book on a shelf, and she listened to a county that had stopped making noise. And there is not one word anywhere about what that was like for her, because she never said, and Emmett Dressel, who might have known, was snowed in at his sister's from the 9th to the 22nd. The first man came on the 11th of January. It was not Shattuck. Shattuck came later, and that is its own part of this. It was a man named Delbert Ruck who ran 300 head on the east side and had never held a contract with her, had never spoken to her beyond good morning, and had been at the association meeting in October and had said nothing either way. He came at 7 in the evening on a borrowed horse. He had walked the last 1.5 miles leading it because it had gone through a crust and cut its legs. She let him in. He stood in her front room with the snow melting off him, and he could not get to it. He started 3 times. And in the end what he said was, "I have got 290 head, and I have got nothing to put in front of them." "Sit down," she said. "I have not got the money." "Sit down, Mr. Ruck," she said. "I have not said a figure." He sat down. She went and got the hay book off the shelf and brought it back and put it on the table between them and opened it and turned it around so it faced him. "That is the 4th yard," she said, "the Verdun quarter. It has 131 tons in it, and it was cut this July, and it is good." He looked at the page. He did not read it. He was looking at it the way a man looks at a thing he has been told about for 4 years, and has never once bothered to walk in and see. $6 a ton, she said. Delbert Ruck put his hand over his mouth. Hay at the Ashcroft railhead was $31 that week, and there was none of it. "6, he said. "That is the contract price. It has been the contract price since the spring of 1883. She turned the book back around. "It is written in 9 copies in Ordelia Faw's safe, and it does not go up because it is January. I did not sign a contract." "No," she said. "You did not." She wrote his name in the book. $6 a ton, she said. "You will want about a ton a day for what you have got, and you will want it for 60 days, and you cannot pay for it now, and I am not going to ask you to." Bring a wagon in the morning. Bring 2 if you can borrow 1. Delbert Ruck sat in that chair and cried, which is a thing a 50-year-old stockman does not do in a woman's front room in 1887 unless something has come apart in him. And she let him do it and did not say anything and did not look away either. Then she got up and put the book back on the shelf. "Mr. Ruck," she said. In the morning, after Ruck it went in a rush. 4 men on the 12th, 6 on the 13th. By the 20th of January, she had signed 19 outfits. And the 19 of them between them ran something over 11,000 head. She had 940 tons. That is the arithmetic that broke her heart. And she ran it on the night of the 14th, at the table with a pencil. 11,000 head. A ton will keep about 7 or 8 head alive for a week, poorly, if it is good hay and they are not too far gone. Say 60 days of feeding left. Say 11,000 head. She needed about 11,000 tons. She had 940. She could save, at the outside, if she was hard about it and lucky, something under 1/10 of what was standing in front of her. There was never a version of that winter where Dosha Kinnard saved Ionia County. It has been told that way. It was not that. The most that anybody with hay could do in the February of 1887 was decide, in the fullest and worst sense of the word, who. She spent 2 days on it. She would not do it fast. What she came up with was not generous, and she never pretended it was. It was a rule. And she wrote it on the front page of the hay book, and she followed it for 63 days without a single exception, including for the 2 men she liked best. The rule was 3 lines. Breeding stock before beef. Smallest outfit first. Nobody gets a second allotment until every signed outfit has had a first. That is all. It is not a warm rule. It sent hay to men she had no reason to help, and it sent none to some she did. It put 110 tons into the hands of 11 small outfits who could not have paid $1 of it in February. And it capped Reuel Bayard, who had paid 3 years in advance and was legally owed 600 tons, at 240. She rode out to tell Bayard that herself, in the last week of January, 12 miles through drift. He heard her out. Then he said, "Yes, that is right. You are owed 600. I am owed 600, and I will not be taking it," Bayard said. "Put it where it keeps something alive. I have got 12,000 head, and I am going to lose most of them no matter what either of us does, and 400 tons will not change my number by 2%. It will change 11 other numbers." "Yes," he said. "That is what I said." Then he said the other thing. You may say it now, if you want to. About my contract. There is no reason on earth for you to go on keeping that quiet. She thought about it. "No," she said, "not while it is running. Miss Kinnard, half that county thinks you a swindler. They do, and I am the answer to it. 1 sentence out of me and it is finished. And then every man in the county knows that Reuel Bayard bought 600 tons in June," she said, "and every man in the county knows you knew. And they will not think you were clever, Miss Bayard. They will think you were warned and said nothing, and they will be about half right, and you will have to live here afterward." He did not answer that. "When it is over," she said. Not before. The thaw came on the 28th of January. 2 days of it. The wind came round south, and it went above freezing, and the top 8 inches of a 5-week snowpack turned to water, and for about 40 hours it looked like deliverance, and a good many men said so out loud. Then it went to 18 below on the 30th. What that made was a sheet, not a crust. A crust is a thing an animal breaks through and walks in. What formed across Ionia County on the night of the 30th of January in 1887 was a solid glazed sheet, 3/4 of an inch thick and better in the swales, over 2 feet of snow, unbroken from horizon to horizon. Nothing could paw through it. A horse could not. A cow could not. And what grass there was underneath, which was almost nothing, was now under a lid. The sheet is the reason the number is what it is. Every account from that country says the same. Not the cold, and not the depth. The thaw and the freeze on the 28th and the 30th of January. After the sheet, there was nothing on that range that was not fed by a person from a wagon. She fed from a wagon for 63 days. The operation ran out of 11 stackyards, and it was Emmett Dressel and Doshia Kennard and 2 men she took on in January and could not pay until April. And it went like this. Up at 4. Harness in the dark. 2 wagons, 4 horses each. Because 2 horses could not pull a load through that. Load by lantern, 1.5 tons to the wagon, more if the route was short. Then, out. 6 miles was a day. 9 miles was a day and a night, and she did 9 miles 11 times that winter. And she came back on the road behind the wagon on foot to spare the team, in February, in Dakota Territory, in the dark. They broke a wagon tongue on the 4th of February and lost half a day. They lost a horse on the 11th. On the 17th, Emmett Dressel went through the sheet into a filled coulee with a loaded wagon, and it took 9 hours and 4 men and a block and tackle to get the team out. And every one of those 9 hours came out of somebody's feeding. She did not miss a signed outfit. Not one, not once, in 63 days. There is a page in the haybook for every one of those days. Tons out, where, whose, the handwriting gets worse through February, and by the first week of March it is barely hers. Ambrose Shattuck came on the 9th of February. He came in the afternoon, and he did not come to the house. He waited by the gate of the home stack yard until she came down, the same as Bayard had in June. And he stood there in the cold with his hat in his hands, which at 18 below is not a small thing to do. He was not the same man who had stood up in the upstairs room in October. Nobody was by February. I have got 1,400 left, he said, out of 4,100. I heard. Most of what is left is the breeding stock, because they were in close. He looked at the fence. I am not going to ask you. All right. I mean, I am not going to ask you, Shattuck said. I have thought about it the whole way here. I read a list out in a room about you in October. I got the figure wrong and you corrected it for me, and I have thought about that more than I have thought about the cattle, if you want the truth, and I cannot stand at this gate and ask, then why are you standing at it? He did not have an answer for a while. I do not know, he said. She looked at him. She was tired in a way that she was not hiding by February, and she had been up since 4, and she had come down off a stack to have this conversation. Mr. Shattuck, she said, how many head? I am not asking. You have not asked. I have. How many head? 1,400 and some. 1,100 of it breeding stock. She went and got the book. She brought it out to the gate in the cold and opened it against the top rail and wrote in it standing up. 19 outfits ahead of you, she said. You will be 20. Everybody signed gets a first allotment before anybody gets a second. And I am about 11 days off finishing the firsts, so you will start on or about the 20th. Miss Kinnard, 90 tons over the run if it holds. It will not be enough. It will be enough for the breeding stock if you are hard about which ones. She shut the book. $6 a ton, she said. Ambrose Shattuck stood at that gate in the cold with his hat in his hands, and he said, why? And she gave him the only answer she ever gave anybody about any of it. And it is the sentence that is carved on the stone at Ionia, and it was not intended to be fine. Because that is what the fee was for, she said. Then she said, the 20th. Bring your own wagons, I have not got any to spare. And she went back up on the stack. Take 1 day of the 63 and slow it down, because 63 days is a number, and a number is not a thing anybody can feel. The 11th of February, 1887, it is in the Hay Book. It was not a remarkable day. 4 o'clock. Dark 21 below with no wind, which is the good kind. She lights the lamp in the kitchen and eats standing up. Bread and cold beef and coffee. 4 minutes. Out to the barn. The harness is stiff and has to be worked in the hands before it will go on an animal. And at 21 below, a collar that has not been brought in overnight will not seat properly, so the collars have been in the kitchen since 10 the night before, and they are warm and they smell. 8 horses. 4 to a wagon. Emmett Dressel is already out. He has been out since 3:30, doing the second team. He does not talk in the morning, and neither does she, and they have worked out over 5 years how to do a harnessing in the dark without either of them saying a word. 5:30. Loading 1.5 tons to the wagon, by fork, by lantern, off the top of a stack that is frozen on its outer 4 inches and has to be opened with a hay knife before a fork will go into it. The hay knife is the worst tool on the place. It is a long serrated blade on a handle, and you cut a stack the way you would cut a loaf, standing on it, in the dark, in 21 below. And it takes 11 minutes to open a face, and your hands are wet inside your mitts by the end of it, and wet is how a man loses fingers. She lost the tip of the left third finger in January of 1887. It is not mentioned in any account of her life, except a note in Ordelia Faw's book about buying lint, and it did not stop her working that week. 7 o'clock. Loaded. Light coming. Out the gate. The road is not a road. It is a line across a sheet of glazed snow, with a track cut into it by her own wagons over 4 weeks. And the track is the only navigable ground in the county, and it drifts full every time it blows. 4 miles to the Hesk place. 4 miles takes 2 hours and 10 minutes. The horses go through the sheet at every 4th or 5th stride. They come through it at the knee. It is an inch of glazed crust over 2 feet of loose snow, and it cuts, and there is nothing to be done about it except go slower. So she goes slower. 9:10. Wilbur Hesk's gate. 80 head. They hear the wagon. That is the part she talked about, the once she talked about any of it. And she did not talk about the animals or the cold. They hear the wagon, she said. They know it about a 1/4 mile out. They start before you can see them. The unloading is 20 minutes, and it is the only warm work of the day. You do not throw a load off in a heap. A heap gets fouled and trampled, and the strong ones hold the middle of it. You spread it out over a length of ground in a line, so that everything can get at some of it. And Wilbur Hesk had learned that from her in January, and was doing it right by February. 9:40. Empty, then back 4 miles, which takes 1 hour and 40, because the wagon is light. And then load again. And then out again. This time to the ruck place, which is 6. Second load out at 11. Ruck's gate at 1:30. 290 head at Ruck's, and 1.5 tons between them is not a meal. It is a delay, and both of them knew it, and neither of them said it. Unload, back, dark, at 5:30. Third load by lantern to the Trice place, which is close, 2.25 miles, and she takes that one last every time, because it is the short haul, and because Wesley Trice will have the barn open. Home at 9. 9 to 10:30 is horses. Rub down, feed, water, check feet, check shoulders for galls, because a galled shoulder puts a horse out for a week, and she had 8 horses and no spares by February. 10:30. The book. Tons out, where whose 11th of February 1887. 4.5 tons. Hesk 1.5, Ruck 1.5, Trice 1.5. Her hand on that page is bad, and it is the same 3 numbers written 3 times. 11 o'clock. Bring the callers in, then sleep for 5 hours and do it again. 60, 3 times. That is what the sentence "there was hay in the county" actually consists of. It is not a decision made in a room. It is 4 in the morning, 63 times, at 21 below, by 2 people and 8 horses, with a hay knife. And on the 22nd of February, in the middle of that, she rode 9 miles out to the North Range in the afternoon, between the 2nd and 3rd loads on a Sunday, to look at Ambrose Shattuck's fence line. She had no business there. Nobody asked her. She wanted to see it. She sat on a horse on a rise above 3 miles of wire that had been the north boundary of the largest cattle operation in Ionia County, and she looked at it for some period of time that is not recorded. And then she rode 9 miles home and loaded the 3rd wagon and took it to Wesley Trice. She never said one word about what she went out there for. Emmett Dressel thought about it for the rest of his life, and his best guess, which he gave to his sister in 1919, and which is as good as anybody has, was this. She went to see it because she had already seen it, he said, in 71, and I think she wanted to know whether it was the same. And it was. The last load went out on the 14th of March, 1887. It went to Wilbur Hesk, who had 80 head and had been the smallest outfit on the list, and had therefore been the first fed on the 12th of January. And it was fitting in a way that nobody arranged. There were 4 tons left in the 11th yard. 936 out of 940. 63 days. 22 outfits. Every ton of it written down. The sheet went off in the last week of March. The snow went in April, and it went fast, and it went into every low place in that country at once. And there was water standing in the sloughs in Ionia County in the middle of April that had not held water in 3 years. The grass came up green and thick and early. That is the thing they all mention. Every account. The spring of 1887 in Dakota Territory was one of the best springs anybody could remember. And the grass came up over ground that had nothing left standing on it to eat it. Then the counting started. Now, 16 years earlier, a girl of 17 had counted 941 animals on the Jim River in 39 days with a pencil and a copybook, because a bank wanted a number and there was nobody else to go. She had never spoken about it in Ionia County. It is not in a letter. It is not in the storebook. Emmett Dressel, who worked for her for 9 years by then, did not learn about it until 1893. In the 3rd week of April 1887, the Ionia County Stock Association resolved that a proper accounting of the county's losses was required for the banks, and that it could not be done by each outfit for itself because too many of the outfits had ceased to exist. They needed somebody to count. They needed somebody who could ride the whole county, who had no cattle of their own and therefore no number to protect, who could keep a tally that a bank in Chicago would accept. There was exactly one person in Ionia County who fitted that description. Fenner Cobb rode out to ask her on the 21st of April. He was embarrassed about it, and he said so before he said anything else. And he had been the chairman in the upstairs room in October, and he had said, "Miss Kinnard, do you care to answer?" She heard him out at the gate. Then she said, "Yes, you have not asked what it pays." "No, it pays $1.50 a day, and the association will find you a horse." "I will use my own horse," she said. "I will want a second man for the far sections, and I will want it understood in writing before I start that the number I bring in is the number, and that no man gets to argue his own down after he has seen it." Cobb said that could be arranged. "Then yes," she said. She counted Ionia County for 44 days. She started on the 26th of April and finished on the 8th of June. She did it the way she had been taught by nobody, On the Jim River at 17. 5 to a group. 4 groups and a stroke. 25 to a block. Draws and coulee bottoms and willow bends and the north side of every fence line. Because that is where they end up. She used the same copybook. That is not a flourish, and it is not sentiment. It is in the county record, because the copybook was submitted with the final tally, and the clerk noted that the front pages carried an earlier accounting, dated the 19th of May, 1871, on the Jim River in Dakota Territory, in the same hand. That clerk's note is how anybody knows about the Ostrander winter at all. She never told it. She handed in a book with it in the front and let a man in an office find it. The number she brought in on the 8th of June, 1887, was 51,040. 51,040 animals out of a county that had gone into November, carrying somewhere near 74,000. 69%. Some outfits were worse. Shattuck came out at 66% lost. 2 of the big North Range outfits came out over 80, and neither of them ever ran cattle again. Reuel Bayard, who had the money to feed and had bought 240 tons and every pound he could get by rail besides, lost 58% and considered himself, correctly, lucky. The 22 outfits she fed did not do better on the whole. That has to be said. Because it is true, and because the story is worse without it. They did not do better on the whole. Most of them lost more than half. What they did was they did not end. Every one of the 22 was still an outfit in the spring of 1888. All 22. Not one of them liquidated, not one of them was foreclosed. And every one of them had breeding stock alive in the April grass, which is the only thing that lets a man start again. 19 outfits in Ionia County that she did not feed did not survive 1887. That is the whole of it. That is the measurable, arguable, bank-verifiable difference that Dosa Kennard's 4 years of being laughed at came to. 22 outfits still standing. And the number that everybody remembers, the one that got into the newspaper in Yankton in the autumn, and then into a farm paper in Iowa, and then eventually onto a stone, 900 head of breeding stock alive in the county in the spring of 1887 that would not otherwise have been. 911 in her book. The papers rounded it. She hated the rounding. It is the only thing in the entire business she is recorded as complaining about. It was 911, she told the Yankton man. You have got the county number to the single animal, and you will not take 11 off my other one. He printed 900 anyway. Now, the part that has to be handled carefully. Because it is where the story could go false. She was not vindicated by the winter. The winter did not vindicate her. The winter is what she had been trying to prevent. And it arrived, and everything she had built was designed to make its arrival survivable, and it did that for 22 outfits out of 41, and the other 19 are also part of the record. What vindicated her was a much smaller thing that happened in a room, in July, and it was done by Reuel Bayard, and it took about 90 seconds. The association met on the 9th of July, 1887, in the same upstairs room over the land office. There were 19 men there. There had been 31 in October. The business was the losses and the banks and a resolution of thanks to Miss Kennard for the count, which passed, and which she was not present for because she was haying. Then Reuel Bayard stood up. I want a thing in the minutes, he said, which is the same phrase Ambrose Shattuck had used 9 months earlier in that room, and everybody in it knew it. In June of last year, I went out to Miss Kennard's place in the evening, and I tripled my contract with her, Bayard said. 600 tons. 3 years. Paid a year in advance. The room did not make a sound. I did it because I had ridden this range in the spring, and there was no grass under my cattle, and I knew it. And I asked her to keep it quiet, and she kept it quiet. And she kept it quiet through October, when Ambrose read his list out in this room. And she kept it quiet in February, when half of you were at her gate. He put his hands on the table. She was asked in January whether she would let me say it. I offered. She would not have it while the contract was running. He looked around. So she sat in this room in October and let a true list be read against her, when the answer to it was in Ordelia Faw's safe with my name on it, and she could have had me on my feet inside a minute. Bayard was not a dramatic man, and he did not make a speech of it. That is all, he said. I want it in the minutes, because it is the reason there are cattle in this county, and because I have had 9 months to think about what it cost her, and I would like it written down somewhere that it cost her 8 contracts and 2 years, and a name in this town, and she paid every bit of that on purpose, in cash, and she did not tell one lie the entire time. He sat down. The secretary wrote it. That entry is 19 lines long. Ambrose Shattuck asked, from the floor, that his October statement be read into the record again alongside it, in full, uncorrected. It was. They are on facing pages in the Association Minute Book at Ionia to this day. Shattuck's tally on the left, Bayard's 90 seconds on the right. And the tally is accurate, and it is the same 976 tons she corrected upward for him herself. The contracts came back in August. Not a few. All of them. And more. And they came fast. And the way she handled that is the part of this that people find hardest to believe. 11 men came to her in the first 3 weeks of August 1887 wanting reserve contracts. 6 of them had held one before and quit it. 2 of them had been at the stove when Shattuck quit. One of them had used the name Hay Widow to her face in the store in December of 1885. She took every single one of them. At the same rate. She did not raise the fee. Not by a cent. Not that year and not the next. The most she was ever offered for a contract in the autumn of 1887 was 4 times her standing rate, from a man out of Verdun who was not even in her county. And she wrote him back and quoted the standing rate, and he took it. Emmett Dressel thought she had gone soft in the head and told her so. You could name a figure. Any figure. There is not a man in 4 counties who would argue with you now. I know. Then name one. Emmett, she was writing. What am I selling? He had heard this before, and he answered like a boy in a schoolroom. A winter that does not kill. And what makes it work? He did not have that one. That everybody can afford it, she said. That is the whole mechanism. If the fee is small, a man carries it in the good years without noticing, and he does not have to be brave or clever. He only has to not cancel. The moment it costs enough to think about, he thinks about it. And he cancels in the 4th mild year, because he is a human being. She put the pen down. I lost 8 contracts in 4 mild years at a cheap rate, she said. At a dear one I would have lost 11 in 2. So you charge nothing for being right. I charge the same for being right as I charged for being wrong, she said. That is what makes it a fee and not a wager. Mr. Bayard understood that in 1883, and it took the rest of this county 4 years and a bad winter. She had 62 contracts by the spring of 1889. She had 31 stack yards by 1891 across 3 counties and 4,100 tons and 11 men working. And she still put up hay herself every July until she was 54 years old, because she did not trust anybody else's stack tops. And she sold hay off those stack yards every single September for the rest of her working life, in daylight, on the road, past the store. Nobody ever counted the loads again. That is the quiet joke at the end of it, and she made it herself, once in 1894. To a young man from a farm paper who had come to write about the reserve system and who asked her whether the county had ever misunderstood what she was doing. For 4 years, she said. What changed their minds? Nothing changed their minds, she said. The same wagons go through that town in September that went through in 1885. They are the same wagons, and it is the same hay, and it is the same road. Nobody has changed his mind about anything. They have only got a reason now to read it the other way. The young man asked what the reason was. 51,040, she said. Wesley Trice. He had held his contract through all 4 years and had never once asked her about the September hauls. And he had put a hand up an inch off his knee in February of 1885 and said "Dosia," and stopped her from talking herself into a hole. He ran 900 head south of the river, and he was 41 in 1887, and he was a lean, weathered man who did not say things twice. He came out of that winter with 280 head. He had been fed. He had been 11th on the list, and he had had 94 tons, and it had not been anything like enough. And he had lost 69%, the same as the county, and he never once suggested that it should have gone otherwise. In the middle of the feeding, in February, on a day when she came in at 9 at night with the second wagon, he was at her barn. He had been there 4 hours. He had unharnessed the first team and rubbed them down and fed them and got the wagon under cover, and he had a fire going in the tack room. And there was coffee. He did not say anything about it. He did that 11 times in February and 9 times in March. And the whole of what he ever said about it, when she finally asked him in April why he had, was, somebody had to be doing the horses. They were married in October of 1889, 2 years after, in the Ionia church on a Tuesday, with 11 people there. She was 36. She kept her name on the hay book because the contracts were in it, and changing it would have been a nuisance. And she signed herself Dosia Kinnard on paper for 30 more years, and Dosia Trice on nothing at all. They had no children. That is in the record, and it is not commented on anywhere. And there is no reason to comment on it here either. He sold his cattle in 1892 and came into the hay business with her and ran the 3 western counties, and he was by every account a good hand and a better judge of ground than she was. And he never once in 26 years told anybody that the reserve had been his idea, which by 1900 he could have got away with easily. Now, what the thing became. The Ionia Reserve was copied. That is the practical legacy, and it is bigger than she is. There were 4 of them in Dakota by 1890, and 11 by 1893, and 2 in Montana, and 1 in the Nebraska Sandhills, run by a man who had ridden up in 1888 specifically to sit in Dosia Kinnard's front room for 3 days and read the hay book. She let him. She let anybody read it. She never took a cent for the method, and she never tried to hold it. And when the Nebraska man offered her a share, she said no, in a way he described afterward as slightly offended. It is not a thing you can own, she told him. It is a fence and a book. The fence is common knowledge, and the book is arithmetic. If it works, you will find that out, and if it does not, you will find that out too. And neither one of them is any of my business. The Territorial Agricultural Bulletin printed her contract in full in 1895 at her request, with the rotation clause explained in a footnote she wrote herself. That footnote is 4 sentences long. It is the only time in her life she ever put the explanation in front of the public. And she did it 8 years after she was proved right, when nobody needed it, in a bulletin that farmers read. It says, the hay held in reserve is not the hay contracted for. Wild hay loses its value in the 3rd year and must be sold and replaced, or the reserve becomes worthless. What is owed is a tonnage of sound feed, and not any particular stack. Any operator who does not rotate his reserve is not holding a reserve. He is holding a debt he cannot pay. That is the sentence she could not say in an upstairs room in October of 1886 to 31 men. It is 4 lines in a farm bulletin. It would have taken 40 seconds. It is worth being honest about what those 4 years cost, because the tidy version leaves it out. They cost her 8 contracts. That is the visible one. They cost her, by a calculation Judson Alcorn made at the bank in 1889 out of curiosity and showed her somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 of income she would have had if the county had simply believed her. They cost her the 2 years between her 31st and her 33rd birthdays, which she spent working 11 and 12-hour days for a business that was shrinking in a town where a name had been made up about her. They nearly cost her the whole thing. That is not dramatic license. In April of 1886, she was 11 months from foreclosure, and the only reason she was not foreclosed is that a man with a bad hip rode 4 miles in the evening in June. If Rule Bayard had not come out that night, there is no reserve in Ionia County in the winter of 1886. There is a bank sale in the spring of 1887 of a mowing machine and 2 rakes and 8 horses, and 11 fences come down, and 940 tons never get cut at all. She knew that. She said so plainly whenever anybody tried to make her the whole of it. I was 11 months from done, she told the farm paper man in 1894. Print that. It is the useful part. Why is it the useful part? Because a person reading this is going to think the lesson is, be right and hold on, she said. That is not the lesson. I was right, and I held on, and I was going under anyway, and what saved it was one man in June who happened to have looked at the same grass I had. She thought about it. The lesson is that being right does not pay, she said. Not by itself, not on any schedule you can bank. If you are going to do a thing like this, you had better arrange to survive being right, because that is the part that will kill you. There is one more cost, and it is the one she never mentioned. 19 outfits. 19 outfits in Ionia County did not survive the winter of 1886 and 1887, and she had fed 22. And she had made the rule herself at a table on the 14th of January with a pencil. Breeding stock before beef. Smallest outfit first. Nobody twice until everybody once. That rule is defensible. It is more than defensible. It is probably the best rule available to a person in that position, and she wrote it in 2 days and followed it for 63 without an exception. It also meant that on some particular morning in February of 1887, a wagon went to one gate and did not go to another. And she was the one who decided which, and both of those men were still alive in Ionia County in 1900, and one of them was running cattle, and one of them was clerking in a store in Ashcroft. She did not talk about that. Not once, not to Emmett Dressel, not to Wesley Trice, not to the farm paper. But she paid the fee on the Ashcroft man's daughter's schooling from 1893 to 1897 through Ordelia Faw anonymously, and it did not come out until Ordelia died in 1911 and her daughter found the arrangement in the store books. So there is that. Make of it what you want. She would not have wanted it in here at all. Emmett Dressel found out about the Jim River in 1893. He had worked for her for 9 years by then, and he ran the Eastern Yards, and he was 33, which was her age in the bad winter, a thing he noticed at the time and mentioned once. He was in the front room waiting for her, and the hay book was on the shelf where it always was. And beside it that year was the old copybook. Because she had been back to it for something to do with the county history rooms, he opened it. He read the front 11 pages. Then he sat down on the floor, which he told his sister about afterward and could not explain. She came in and found him there. That is from Yankton Way, she said. It is old. It is 1871. Yes, Dosia. He had the book open on his knees. 941 out of 1106. Yes, you were 17. I was. He sat there. You had this, he said, the whole time. In October of '86, you had this on a shelf in this room. When Shattuck stood up in that hall, you could have brought this in and put it on the table and said what? That you had seen it, that you knew what it was, that you were not guessing. Emmett, she said. She sat down in the chair opposite him, in her coat. If I bring that book into that room, what is it? He did not answer. It is a sad thing that happened to a girl a long way from here, she said. It is not evidence about hay. It does not prove one thing about whether the tons in my yards are there, which is what was actually being asked. It only proves that I am frightened of winter, which any man in that room could have told you already, and several of them had. It would have moved them. Yes, she said, it would have moved them. That is exactly what is wrong with it. She took the copybook off his knees and closed it and held it. A thing that moves people is not the same as a thing that is true, she said. I had a true thing. It was 9 minutes long, and it was on the shelf next to that one, and it was boring, and nobody would open it. And the temptation, Emmett, the whole 4 years, was to stop offering the boring true thing and start offering the sad moving one instead. Most people would have. Most people do, she said. And then it works, and they do it again the next time, and inside 10 years they are a person who wins arguments with a dead outfit on the Jim River. I have met 1 or 2. I did not want to be one. He said, you could have just been believed. I could have, she said, for the wrong reason. And then in 1891, when I told them something else, they would have believed that for the wrong reason too, and one day I would have been wrong about something and they would still have believed me. She put the copybook back on the shelf. That is the danger, she said. Not being disbelieved, being believed for something that is not the reason. Then she said, did you eat? And that was the end of it. And Emmett Dressel told that conversation 4 times in his life and got it slightly different each time, and always got that last part the same. There is a photograph. It was taken in September of 1904 at the Ionia Fairground. And it is in the county rooms, and it shows 14 people standing in front of a hay wagon. Docia Kennard is not in the middle of it. She is 4th from the left, in a dark coat, and she is looking at something off to the side of the camera, and not at the camera. And she is 51 years old, and gray, and she is a big woman still, and she is not smiling. The man in the middle is a stranger. He is a hay contractor out of Nebraska named Emery Lisk, and he had come up for the fair, and he was 34. And he ran a reserve of 9,000 tons across 5 counties, which was better than twice what she had ever held. He had never met her before that morning. He is in the middle of the photograph because the photographer put him there. And the photographer put him there because he was the biggest operator present, and nobody thought anything of it at the time, including her. That photograph is the whole thing. By 1904, the reserve was ordinary. It was not her idea anymore. It was a way that hay was done in 4 states, and there were men running it who had never heard her name. And one of them is standing in the middle of a photograph in her county at her fair with her 4th from the left. She thought that was the correct outcome. She said so. Wesley Trice died in 1915. She ran the business 4 more years and sold it in 1919 to Emmett Dressel and 2 other men at a price the buyers all said afterward was too low. And she lived in the house in Ionia until 1918, and then out at the home place until she died in 1924. She was 71. Now, there is a way of ending this that would be false, and it is the one that is usually used, so it is worth saying what it is and refusing it. The false ending is that she was vindicated. She was not, in the way that word usually means. Nobody in Ionia County ever apologized to her. Ambrose Shattuck came closest, at a gate in February, with his hat in his hands, and what he actually said was that he could not ask. And he never said sorry, and she never asked him to, and they did business for 18 years afterward and got on well. The men who had quit came back and signed and paid the same fee, and nobody discussed it. The name went away. Nobody ever announced that it had. It just stopped being used, sometime in 1888, the way those things do. And the wagons went through town every September for 30 more years, exactly as they had. And nobody counted them, and if you had stopped a man in Ionia in 1901 and asked him whether it had ever looked to him like she was selling off the reserve, he would have said no. Of course not. That is how a reserve works. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. That is what she got. Not an apology and not a vindication. She got the thing she was arguing for turned into something so obvious that nobody could remember it had ever been argued about. Which is, if you think about it for a moment, exactly the same shape as the business itself. She sold a winter that does not kill. When it worked, nothing happened, and nobody could see it. She spent 4 years arguing for a rotation clause. When she won, it became obvious, and nobody could remember it. Both times the proof of the thing was its own disappearance. She was, I think, entirely at peace with that, and there is one piece of evidence for it. And it is the last thing. The stone at Ionia was put up in 1926 by the association, 2 years after she died. And it carries her name and her dates and the sentence from the gate, which Ambrose Shattuck's son supplied and which is the only quotation on it. Because that is what the fee was for. Under it, there is a number. And the number is not 50, 1,040. And it is not 900. And it is not 22. The number on the stone is 911. She did not choose it. She was 2 years dead. Emmett Dressel chose it. And when he was asked why he had not used the round one that was in all the papers, he said, because she counted them. 911 head of breeding stock, alive in Ionia County, in the April grass of 1887. Counted the way a girl of 17 had been taught to count by nobody at all, on a river in another territory, in a spring nobody remembers, when a bank wanted a number and there was no one else to go. 5 to a group, 4 groups and a stroke, 25 to a block. She counted 941 that first time, and she was 17, and every one of them was already lost before she started. She counted 911 the second time, and she was 34, and every one of those was alive.